Hello, Deborah. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Deborah Alcott-Tyler, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Directory of Social Change, which is a charity that supports other charities, and I'm also one of the founders of the Small Charities Coalition. And you've asked me here today to talk about the importance of volunteering and the charity sector in general, and I've got some things, I want to chat about really. I want to start by thinking about, the fundamental question, why do people volunteer in the first place? At the moment, of course, a lot of the message is that there are lots of benefits to volunteering. You should volunteer because it's very, very good for you. But actually, I'm not convinced that that's the right argument about why people should volunteer. There's a fabulous book written by a chap called Matt Ridley called The Origins of Virtue. And Matt Ridley is a chap who writes about evolutionary psychology and biology and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things he talks about in the book is that there's a huge amount of evidence that goes to show that human beings are hardwired for altruism. We are hardwired to care for and look after other human beings. It's not even conscious now, it's instinctual because it's good for us. One of the reasons we've survived as a species is because of this desire of ours to help each other. Now, of course, there is some conscious to that. Human beings also want to do well for themselves and have a tendency to want to, step on the other chap beside them. But actually, fundamentally, as a society or as a species, human beings are hardwired. I say it again, hardwired to be helpful to each other. And actually, that's a blooming good job because without our desire to help each other, society would collapse. It wouldn't have just collapsed 2,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago, a couple of millennia ago. It would also collapse today. In this country, everybody volunteers, even if they're not conscious that they're volunteering. When you volunteer to babysit for a neighbour's child, or when you volunteer to, help a neighbour take his bins out down to the end of the road or whatever, we're all about providing a service to others for no pay, for nothing more than the desire or the need, even the urge to help. And then, of course, we have more formal volunteering. It's very difficult. The stats are hard to pin down, but there are estimations of around about 6 million people probably in very formal volunteering roles, in other words, where they're registered as volunteers for the charities that they volunteer for. Now, I would just say, imagine what our society would be like if human beings didn't volunteer, if we didn't all want to help each other or care for each other. Basically, we have to volunteer. We cannot survive as a species if we don't. Which brings me back to what I was saying at the beginning about the traditional narrative about volunteering. We're told, and certainly particularly young people, the pressure is it's good for you. You should volunteer because it'll improve your admin skills and your financial skills and understand about running organisations or how to negotiate or how to plan or whatever, or it looks good on your CV. All of that is probably true, but isn't really the reason that one should volunteer. And I would argue isn't even the reason why people volunteer in the first place, because volunteering is more important than that. Volunteering is about creating a society of decent human beings. See, here's the thing. I don't think you can teach empathy. I don't think you can pass an exam in it. I don't think you can study books about empathy. We learn to be empathetic to our fellow human beings when we are spending our time with those who are less fortunate than us, when we are actually caring for others who don't have the same advantages that we do. You can't study compassion, or you probably can, there's probably a degree on it somewhere, but the reality is you only really understand about what it is to feel compassionate when you have to be in an environment where somebody needs your compassion because they're suffering or they're ill or they're dying or something's hurting them. In other words, we learn about our responsibility to others in society by acting in society, by actually caring for other human beings. That's what creates that roundness and that sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. And I think there's a bit of a danger at the moment that we're trying to promote volunteering as a thing that should be done to young people by pointing out to them how good it is for their careers, how good it is for their CVs. And I think that's entirely the wrong message. And it's almost like we're saying charities are in danger of saying volunteer because it's good for you to volunteer, when actually my experience has been that people tend to volunteer not because it's good for them, because it's good for the cause or the people that they're volunteering for, because it's good for society. I've got to be honest with you, I have never ever yet met a volunteer who says they volunteer because they want to support social and economic regeneration, ever. People volunteer because they care. They care about cancer or the broken down canal or children or young people or those who are disadvantaged. That is why people volunteer. And I think our message needs to be out to young people or to any people, whatever age they are, volunteer because the cause that you're volunteering for matters, not because it's good for you. You do it, in my experience, because you care about a cause. You see, charities are much more than the bed or the bowl of soup. They're the flame around which human beings gather. They're the thing that creates this sense that there is more to our lives than serving ourselves. There is more to our lives than our own families, or our own environment, our own homes, or being able to, sit at home in a fully heated house watching EastEnders or Coronation Street or whatever the thing happens to be on television. Because volunteering reminds us that there are people in society who don't have the advantages that we have, and that actually it's our common humanity that makes our species thrive. Which takes me on really to thinking about what is the role of charities generally. Charities have to be there for their beneficiaries. We have this thing at the moment where, or certainly in my rounds about the sector, I experience lots of charities talking about the money, about the need to raise money, or how much money they've got, or how much they've got in reserves, or whatever. And I think those are entirely the wrong conversations. Charities do not exist to pay the rent, or to pay staff, or to develop volunteers even. Charities exist to serve their beneficiaries, whether that's an endangered species of toad in Devon, or whether it's somebody terminally ill in a hospice, or whether it's a family that's going through difficult circumstances. And everything we do as charities has to be about them. That's not to say, of course, that there aren't side benefits to volunteering, but the basic premise of charitable endeavour is about serving beneficiaries. It's not about making money, and it's not about attracting volunteers or having people add to their CVs as a result of volunteering. In the volunteering community sector, money has to be the mechanism. In fact, it is the mechanism. It's not the motive. It's simply one of the resources we need in order to do our work. And actually, I'd argue it's not even as important as the human resource that we need to do our work. And the trouble is that the current narrative tends to be around about the amount of money you've got, the size of your reserves, as I've already said, the size of your turnover and so on. And there are far too many conversations happening in charities about the money. That's not the conversation we should be having. We as charities, our boards of trustees, should be asking ourselves, who are we trying to serve? What is it that we want to do for them? What resources do we need in order to serve them? What resources do we actually have? And what can we do with the resources that we've got? And, there isn't, or allegedly there's not a lot of money around at the moment. Actually, I'd argue there is still quite a lot of money. It's just not being spent on us. But even if there isn't as much money, it will come back. Those of us, as we get a bit older, what we realise is that money comes and money goes. There's less money now, there will be more money in the future. Then there'll be less money again, then there'll be more money in the future. And the problem is if as charities we think that we can only do our work with money, we might just as well give up and walk away. This environment that we're in right now is not the new normal. We don't accept normal in the voluntary sector. We say, here's a situation, we don't like it, and so we're going to change it. And actually, the reality is that the most reliable form of money in the sector is in the form of gifts. It's grants and it's donations. It's not in the form of contracts or trading activities. Having said all of that, ultimately, what keeps a charity going is its volunteers, people caring. When there's no money to pay staff, I can absolutely guarantee you there is always a human being, a volunteer who will rock up anyway, who will serve and support and care for that vulnerable person or that damaged environment, whether there's money in it or not. And that's what makes the volunteering community sector great.